Hey guys, tonight we drift back through time to the sun-drenched banks of the Nile, where you trudge along muddy riverbanks under a blazing orange sky. The scent of papyrus and roasted figs in the air. You probably won't survive this. After all, you lack a pharaoh's chariot and a priest's sandals, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so I know where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step past clusters of reed huts and follow the low hum of conversations in ancient Egyptian dialect, though your ears as a 21st century wanderer hear only echoes. Ahead, statues of jackal-headed Anubis and winged Isis flank temple entrances, their presence oddly comforting. The scent of burning incense drifts from courtyards, and you can almost imagine those statues stirring to life, welcoming ritual pilgrims. Historians still argue whether these early impressions of divine movement planted the seed for mechanical invention, but one thing is certain: the Egyptians were masters of illusion and showmanship, setting the stage for robotic wonders. Before those temple gates, craftsmen bent over wooden workbenches, carving gears from bronze scraps and hollowing logs into cylinders. This is where the story truly begins. Not in some fantastical laboratory, but in simple workshops by the riverbank. Here, a mainstream historical fact shines through. By the Middle Kingdom, around 2000 BCE, Egyptians had developed basic toothed wheels and pulley systems, primarily for irrigation and construction projects. These practical tools would later be repurposed into automata, but for now they're hoisting stones for pyramids and lifting buckets from the Nile. In one dusty corner, you glimpse a fringed tidbit, a tiny wooden bird, no bigger than your palm, perched on slender legs. When a priest pours water into a hidden chamber beneath its belly, the trapped air forces the bird to flap its wings, an early robotic dove that coos as it moves. Quirky? Absolutely. Historians still debate whether such devices were simply entertaining novelties or early prototypes of more complex automata, but they demonstrate a playful ingenuity you wouldn't expect from pyramid-building societies. You wander past stone walls carved with hieroglyphs, noting a recurring motif: the sun god, Ra in Mon, his solar bark sailing across the sky. Such imagery, blending the divine with movement, reveals the cultural currents fueling mechanical curiosity. If statues could represent gods traversing the heavens, why not build statues that actually traverse temple halls? This imaginative leap, born from religious devotion, would plant the conceptual roots of robotics. As you stroll deeper into the workshop district, you hear the clink of chisels and the hiss of heated bronze. You can almost taste the excitement as craftsmen trade sketches on papyrus scrolls, rudimentary blueprints that hint at kinetic sculptures. Between jokes about an underpaid scribe who mixed up gear sizes, talk about a real twist in the plot, they brainstorm automata that could pour wine or ring bells during festivals. 3 jokes in, you grin. One about a cobra that misplaced its hood, one about a mason whose chisel just couldn't cut it, and one about a scribe claiming he'd sealed the deal by writing blueprints on fish skin. By the workshop entrance stands a wooden contraption with a hidden weight-driven mechanism, an early clockwork device that marks the hours with a silent release of water. This mainstream historical fact underlines Egyptian mastery of timekeeping. Klepstra's water clocks had been in use since the First Dynasty, around 3000 BCE, regulating temple rites and administrative schedules. Yet here, you glimpse potential. What if that same principle could animate figures rather than measure time? You pause at a column where hieroglyphs depict statues turning their heads toward offerings. One quirky fringe theory, often whispered by adventurous scholars, suggests these scenes describe actual mechanical statues rather than purely symbolic art. Historians still debate whether such interpretations overstate the archaeological evidence, but they point to a deep fascination with movement woven into Egyptian culture. Your path leads you to the banks of a small canal where water wheels and shadufs raise irrigation water. The rhythmic tick-tick of wooden buckets hitting the water's surface could almost be the heartbeat of an unseen automaton. You sense that in time, the Egyptians would harness hydraulic power not just to water fields, but to breathe life into statues. As dusk settles and torches flicker in temple courtyards, you realize this workshop district is more than stone and wood. It's the cradle of mechanized dreams. The foundations for robot-like inventions lie here. Practical knowledge of gears, pulleys, and hydraulics melded with religious imagery, and a playful spirit of spectacle. And sure, you may be tempted to call this robotics, but remember you're standing at the very dawn of a journey that will span millennia. You step through flickering torchlight corridors, the echo of your sandals against limestone walls blending with distant hymns to Ra. The air here is cool, scented with lotus oil and the faintest whiff of crocodile dung sunscreen, a reminder of the practical world you just left behind. Ahead, colossal relief carvings come alive in your mind. Sekhmet's blazing eyes, Horus's piercing gaze, and the serpent Apophis writhing beneath the solar bark. It's in these divine narratives that you find the spark igniting Egyptian mechanical wonder. You pause before a bas-relief showing Khnum, the ram-headed god, molding humans on his potter's wheel. His hands seem to shape clay, as if powered by unseen gears. Mainstream history tells us that Egyptians believed gods could animate stone and clay, imbuing inanimate matter with life, an idea so potent that craftsmen aimed to channel it through wood and bronze statuettes. Historians still argue whether these myths merely reflected cultural aspirations or served as literal blueprints for kinetic art. But their influence on early automata design is undeniable. As you run your fingers over the cool stone, you imagine priests whispering incantations, Khnu spin your wheel, and marionettes responding in kind. Fringe tidbits float to the surface of your mind, like stories of a temple dove that flapped its wings whenever the goddess Isis's name was spoken. Some say hidden bellows beneath the altar squeezed air through reed pipes, animating the bird. Quirky, absolutely. Historians still debate whether this tale describes real mechanical ingenuity or clever priestly trickery to awe worshippers. You venture deeper into the hypostyle hall, pillars rising like a forest of giants overhead. The flicker of flame reveals hieroglyphs depicting Shu, god of air, lifting the sky goddess Nut. In one panel, Nut arches gracefully, as if suspended by strings. You can almost hear the silent hum of a primitive pulley, adjusting the angle of a carved statue so that Nut's curve shifts with the sun's path. This mainstream fact, Egyptians mastered pulley systems for temple banners and chariot rigging by the New Kingdom, 150 Pfeft, 1070 BCE, provides the physical backbone for divine enactments. A soft breeze stirs incense smoke, carrying whispers of a fringe theory that some statues were mounted on concealed wheeled platforms, rolling forward when priests tugged hidden ropes. According to these accounts, during the Opit festival, the statue of Amun-Re would promenade from Karnak to Luxor Temple, much to the amazed delight of spectators. Historians still argue whether such processions relied on human bearers exclusively, or whether mechanical aids lightened the burden. It's tantalizing to think you might have stood among them, marveling as a robotic god glided by. You proceed to the chamber dedicated to Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom. Here, lavish lovings of papyrus scrolls and ink pots rest atop altars. The walls illustrate Thoth inscribing divine laws in the heavens, his pen gliding across an invisible surface. You imagine a small automaton, a bronze ibis, with jointed wings, tilting its head to dip into ink and scratch symbols onto a clay tablet. Mainstream scholarship confirms Egyptians understood pivot joints and simple hinges, applying them in tomb doors and furniture. Yet to orchestrate movement in 3 dimensions, they turn to stories of Thoth's celestial writing. Your fingers brush a carved cartouche containing the name of Amenhotep III, under whose reign spectacle was elevated to art form. Priests supposedly reenacted solar boat journeys at dawn. Statues of Ra mounted on tracks, moving slowly as if across the horizon. You sniff the dusty air, tasting cedar from the sacred boat's timbers. Fringe evidence suggests some tracks incorporated grooves, lined with lubricated animal fat, enabling smoother glides, early low-friction engineering, if you will. Historians still debate whether these tracks were purely symbolic or literal channels, guiding the divine image. A sly grin crosses your face as you recall the jokes carved into your memory. One about a priest who claimed his wooden statue had broken down because it refused to pour more wine. One about a scribe who insisted the ibis automaton ran out of ink during a late-night ceremony. and one about a craftsman being paid 2 lotus blooms and a fish for rigging a cobra to hiss on cue. You can almost hear the temple staff chuckle under their breath, the sarcasm gentle yet unmistakable. In the dim glow, you notice a series of conical pendants hanging from a ceiling beam. Each swings in perfect opposition to its neighbor, creating a silent counterbalance. This clever use of weight distribution enabled statues of Anubis to bow and rise without human push or pull. It's a mainstream fact that Egyptians employed counterweights in their building projects, a technique later refined by Greeks and Romans, but here you see it allied to breathing life into stone. Still, historians debate whether the pendant's primary function was aesthetic balance or an actual mechanism for motion. The chamber's cool marble floor seems to pulse with potential energy as you imagine priests activating hidden levers. A hush settles around you. You feel the reverence once reserved for deities, now shared with mechanics. These myths of gods who breathed life into clay, who sailed across the sky, who carved the world into being, offered blueprints for physical imitation. It wasn't mere whimsy, but a profound belief that geometry, weight, and faith could unite to animate the inanimate. You head toward the exit, torchlight waning, senses alive with echoes of divine movement. The corridors behind you fade into shadow, but the promise of mechanized gods lingers, from carved relief to jointed automaton. The transition from myth to machine was as natural to the Egyptians as the annual flooding of the Nile. And as you cross the threshold back into moonlit courtyards, you carry with you the realization that every gear and pulley in those workshops was guided by stories older than the pyramids themselves. You slip back into that sun-warmed workshop, the scent of drying papyrus sticky on your fingers. You find yourself hunched over a low wooden bench, squinting at delicate reed fibers that splay beneath your hands. Scrolls unfurl like ancient scrolls of a treasure map, but instead of X's marking treasure, you see rows of circles, lines, and strange glyphs, the first mechanical blueprints. Historians still argue whether these were true step-by-step instructions or more cryptic inspirational sketches, but either way they transformed Egyptian craft from guesswork into guided design. You gently trace the miniaturized gears drawn in dark ink, each tooth wheel numbered in hieratic script, Mantu 1, Hundre 2, Des Y 3. A mainstream historical fact shines through here. By the New Kingdom circa 1500 BCE, Egyptian engineers were recording construction plans on papyrus, including diagrams for temple columns and simple machines such as ramps and levers. What's less well known is that some of these scrolls venture into pure mechanical fantasy, teasing devices that clank and whirl in believable ways. One peculiar papyrus, no larger than your hand, shows a humanoid figure with ankle joints, elbow pivots, and circular indentations at shoulder height. Quirky fringe theories suggest this figure was actually a guide for carving a wooden automaton, capable of raising its arms in greeting. You lean closer, noting tiny annotations. Apply animal fat at pivot for smoother rotation, and test water weight in hidden chamber. Did scribes intend you to assemble a proto-robot? Historians still debate whether these notes represent genuine engineering plans or clever magical symbols disguised as mechanics. A drop of reed ink lands on your cheek, and you wipe it away, giggling at the smell pungent dye. Imagine getting a papyrus stain on your toga in ancient Thebes. A real trend, faux pas. One craftsman joke scrawled in the margin teases, "If your gears slip, blame the crocodile dung sealant." A nod to the slippery, pungent materials they sometimes used. Another jibes at the scribe. "This blueprint is clearer than my last love letter, and yet a third laments, 'My chisel's chipped again. Guess it's time for a career in papyrus comedies.'" You pass the scroll to a colleague, who chuckles and leans in to peer at the diagram of a simple pump, a hollow cylinder with a piston drawn inside, connected by a rod to a crank handle. Mainstream scholarship confirms that Egyptian tomb paintings depict similar hand-operated pumps by the Third Intermediate Period, circa 1100 BCE, used to draw water from wells. Here, though, the schematic includes an extra wheel-driven camshaft, suggesting an automaton could crank itself, an exciting leap from human-powered practicality to self-moving whimsy. The papyrus crackles as you flip to the next sheet, revealing a series of stepped plans for a temple door that opens at dawn without human touch. Each morning, the rising sun's rays would heat a concealed metal rod, triggering expansion that nudged a lever and swung the doors inward like yawning giants. Fringe tales insist some priests timed the mechanism so precisely that worshippers believed the gods themselves were inviting them in. Historians still argue whether thermal expansion was reliably understood, or if the effect was more theatrical trickery than genuine engineering. You lay the sheets across a low table and run your finger along a border of hieroglyphic commentary. Make the wheels of Horus move as the sun's disk moves, and the people shall witness the firm hand of the gods. It's both poetic and instructional, blending religious devotion with mechanical intent. You recall that papyrus was imported from the Nile Delta, processed through 30 steps of soaking, pressing and drying, an artisanal marvel in itself. Imagine the patience required to prepare the very canvas for these blueprints, and then imagine the patience of your ancient engineers slowly inking each line. A fringe tidbit whispers through your thoughts. Somewhere in the valley, a buried scroll supposedly outlines a water-driven flute-playing automaton, where a rotating cylinder with perforations would channel wind through pipes, creating hauntingly beautiful music in temple courtyards. Scholars still debate whether the Egyptians achieved this level of pneumatic sophistication or merely described it in myth. You chuckle at the image. A mechanical musician serenading pharaohs with eternal tunes. Talk about job security. You pick up a reed stylus and add a flourish to one of the diagrams, unconsciously following a tradition older than the pyramids. The craftsman's signature spiral. Across the bottom runs a line of brush strokes, each signifying a test run. Try 10 rotations, then adjust cam height. This attention to iterative testing long predates Galileo's experiments by millennia, yet here there's no mention of systematic measurement in cubits or digits. Instead, performance was judged by the soft click of gears meshing, without grinding. A soft breeze drifts in from the courtyard, and the laughter of apprentices echoes faintly. Someone is practicing a puppet show outside. Your mind flickers back to that wooden dove, to moving statues of Ammon, to pulleys and counterweights. These papyrus schematics are the connective tissue, the moment when imaginative myth became tangible possibility. Remember that cobra that hissed on cue. The gears behind that hiss were likely drawn first on a sheet, just like this. You roll the scrolls carefully and set them aside, heart pounding with the thrill of invention. Each line of ink, each scribbled note, is a testament to Egyptians' seamless blend of artistry, religion, and engineering. With papyrus schematics in hand, they bridged the gap between dream and device, leaving behind a legacy that still intrigues and inspires. And even as you step away from the bench, the ghostly hum of missed gear trials and half-finished automata lingers in your ears, promising that tomorrow, in some dusty tomb, more secrets await. You duck into a shadowed alcove, where the scent of freshly carved wood mingles with the metallic tang of molten bronze, and your fingertips brush against the rough-hewn surface of a plank still warm from the sun. The workshop around you thrums with quiet purpose, hammers tapping bronze molds, saws slicing soft cedar, and the hiss of water vapor escaping from hidden bores. You probably wouldn't survive standing amidst this orchestrated chaos without a woodshop mask or at least some protective talismans. Hey, ancient Egyptians didn't invent Usher, but that's part of the charm. Mainstream history tells us that by around 1800 BCE, Egyptian artisans were adept at working with native timbers like sycamore and acacia, as well as imported cedar from Lebanon, prized for its straight grain and resistance to rot. They mastered bronze casting via the lost wax method, pouring molten alloy into wax molds to create intricate shapes, tools, weapons, and eventually gear teeth. Historians still argue whether the breakthrough of lost wax casting was independently invented in Egypt or arrived via trade links with Mesopotamia, but its impact on precision metalwork is undeniable. You lean closer to a half-finished bronze wheel, its teeth sharp as the edge of a papyrus blade. A craftsman nudges it into place, his hands gloved in linen cloth soaked in oil. You can almost taste the earthy aroma of that oil. Olive oil mixed with fragrant cedar resin, a natural lubricant that seeps into your memory. Fringe lore suggests that some engineers experimented with animal fats mixed with crushed beetle shells to create a slippery paste so slick that gears would hum instead of grind. Quirky, sure, but evidence for such exotic mixtures is scant, and historians still debate whether beetle-derived lubricants ever existed or if the stories are mere alchemical whimsy. A gentle breeze carries the echo of a distant water wheel, reminding you of pulleys. But your focus is on materials. A heap of unused wooden blocks sits nearby, each carved into patterns that look like oversized jigsaw pieces. Primitive but promising, you pick up one block, its weight surprising in your hand, and notice radial grooves scored into the surface. Textured like a lotus seed pod, these grooves were no mere decoration. They formed the rudimentary beginnings of a friction drive. Mainstream archaeological finds confirm that Egyptians used grooved rollers to stabilize large stones during transport, a technique later adopted by Greeks in their primitive presses. Your eyes catch something glinting under a low table. A tiny bronze cog, no more than an inch across, with 11 perfectly cast teeth. The scribe nearby laughs, whispering, 11 teeth? Somebody must have been thinking outside the pharaoh's box. You grin at the joke. There's always one artisan who thinks he's the next big inventor. Fringe whispers claim that odd-numbered gears like this prevented backdriving in temple automata, ensuring statues moved only when intended, not when a stray breeze rattled the courtyard. Historians still debate whether Egyptians understood the principles of backdriving or simply stumbled upon the effect by trial and error. As you cradle the cog, you feel its cool heft, the molted scales of a dragonfly flitting in your peripheral vision. Okay, that last part might be a modern imagination running wild, but you can't help picturing a mythical creature inspiring gear shapes. In reality, most gears were square-cut and chunky, but the Egyptians had a knack for smoothing edges until the metal gleamed like polished carnelian. Jokingly, an apprentice once tailors the phrase, "If bronze could talk, it'd ask for a spa day," and you sense a collective chuckle from the bench. You follow a trail of fine sawdust to another station, where two wooden cylinders sit side by side, linked by a thick leather belt. The craftsman demonstrates how turning one cylinder sends smooth power transfer across the belt, the ancient world's own rubber band drive. Mainstream fact: leather belts were in common use for lifting grain in threshing machines by around 1600 BCE, showing Egyptians' skill at flexible power transmission. Yet here, the belt breathes life into a small automaton monkey, poised to beat a tiny drum in perpetual rhythm. Historians still argue whether belt drives were employed purely for agricultural machinery, or if some workshop secretly built elaborate toys for temple children. You can practically hear the monkey's wooden tail clack against the table, begging for more coconut chips, but you catch yourself mid-laugh, remembering the grander vision. Imagine a fleet of life-sized animal sculptures parading through temple aisles. Fringe accounts hint at a lion automaton, whose jaws snapped shut on a drumstick whenever the high priest spoke a secret incantation. The idea sounds like a CGI blockbuster, but well, historians still debate whether these tales are embellished or if the mechanisms were confiscated and destroyed by jealous rivals. Across the room, a set of nested wooden gears spreads out like a wooden sunflower. A central driver, 3 intermediate wheels, and a ring gear on the outside. This primitive planetary gear arrangement fascinates you. Mainstream research on tomb reliefs confirms Egyptians used compound gear trains to control temple doors and adjustable shutters that darkened sanctuaries at midday. It's astonishing that they grasped proportional motion, one rotation turning another at half speed or quarter speed, long before such machines appeared in Hellenistic workshops. You reach for a leather-bound tool pouch and pull out a reed caliper, 2 sticks bound together that you pinch to measure diameter. The artisan quips, "It's like the world's first iPhone, no touchscreen, all the feel." Another joke sparks from the corner. When quality control fails, blame the Nile's current, and all at once, you're embedded in their boisterous camaraderie. Yet buried beneath the humor is a serious mastery, symmetrical spokes, precisely bored holes, and joints so tight they squeak instead of slacken under load. Historians still debate whether such precision was accidental or the result of formalized apprenticeships tied to temple guilds. You step back to admire a nearly complete automaton, a life-size figure clad in painted linen, bronze joints glinting at elbows and knees, wooden fingers carved with surprising delicacy. The head tilts as you whisper a command in ancient Egyptian, "Lema," meaning rise. In response, a hidden weight descends. Tension builds along a linen cord, and the arm slowly lifts in a greeting gesture. A mainstream fact underlines this miracle. Egyptians employed counterweighted pulleys in heavy lifting tasks, suggesting they recognized the force-multiplying power of weight and leverage. The silhouette of the automaton becomes more than a toy. It feels like a silent mechanical priest. A fringe suggestion tickles your mind. Some scholars speculate these figures were prototypes for funerary guardians, meant to patrol tombs, scaring off looters. Cue the joke you'd write later. Watch out, Ted Nugent. These automata might play air guitar on your tomb. Historians still argue whether burial artifacts included mechanical components, or if the idea was simply a myth spun by later romantic historians. You exhale, tasting the heady perfume of beeswax used to smooth edges, the lingering sweetness of date syrup from a shared snack, and the faint metallic echo of moving parts. In this workshop, wood, bronze, and leather coalesce into moving art, each gear and pulley a testament to Egyptian ingenuity. As you slip out into the warm evening air, your ears still ring with the soft click-click of turning wheels, and you can't help but wonder how many secrets of those primitive gears remain buried in desert sands. Ahead, a row of half-buried stone bowls catches your eye, each fitted with a small spout at the base. These are klepstras, or water clocks, which Egyptians used as early as the Middle Kingdom, circa 2000 BCE, to measure time by the steady drip of water. Mainstream scholarship tells us these devices regulated temple rituals and legal proceedings with surprising accuracy, dividing the night into equal hours regardless of moon phase. Historians still argue whether these water clocks ever achieved precision within minutes, or if their error margins were broader, but there's no doubt they demonstrated an intimate understanding of fluid dynamics. You step onto a narrow stone platform alongside a gently babbling canal, the muted clap of water against aged limestone guiding your steps. The air here is thick with mist and the earthy scent of algae, mingling with the faint tang of copper from the nearby Klepstra's basin. You hear the soft gurgle of water flowing through concealed channels, and you realize you're treading on the pulse of Egyptian hydraulics, the lifeblood of their earliest automata. You crouch to peer into one bowl, tracing the etched scale marking hour increments. Virtually invisible is a thin bronze pointer, buoyed by a cork that rises as the bowl fills, inching along the graduations in silent testimony to the passage of time. You can almost feel its weightless ascent, like watching the sunrise in reverse. Fringe tales whisper of an oracle Clepsydra, hidden in Delphi's sister temple in Egypt, where the water's flow would trigger a secret lever, causing hidden statues to whisper prophecies through reed pipes. Quirky.
Absolutely.
Historians still debate whether this tale is rooted in real pneumatic trickery or if it blossomed from travelers' imaginations. A sudden splash draws your attention to a gleaming bronze urn perched above the Klepstra. Water from the Nile, channeled through a raised conduit, cascades into its mouth, then funnels through hidden tubes into a series of chambers. You follow the path with your eyes, chamber to chamber, each one filling in turn until its weight tips a counterbalanced lever, releasing a small wooden door. Behind it, a tiny puppet, perhaps a crocodile, lunges forward, jaws snapping shut with a soft clack. This delightful mechanical show was a fringe delight of temple fairs, meant to mirror Sobek's ferocity. Historians still argue whether such crocodile automata ever existed, or if descriptions simply conflated hydraulic thresholds with metaphorical tales of gods. As you watch the alabaster wheel turn, you notice that the axle extends into a sealed compartment beneath the bench. A trickle of water drips onto a series of bronze paddles inside, spinning them with renewed vigor. That motion, in turn, winds a coiled linen spring until it's taut and ready to unleash. With a gentle click, the spring unwinds, propelling a small wooden chariot forward across the stone floor, its wheels turned by hidden cams, synchronized with the water-driven axle. You grin at the ingenuity. Here, hydraulic power charges a spring, blending two mechanical traditions into one seamless performance. Fringe engineers speculate that some chariots carried tiny brass trumpeters, whose horns sounded as the cars rolled, although no physical examples survive. Historians still argue whether such hybrid systems were prototypes tested only in temple workshops or widespread curiosities displayed at royal courts. Further along the canal, you hear a rhythmic whoosh, inhale the faint aroma of damp papyrus, and approach a low bench where a priest demonstrates a miniature water wheel. This wheel is carved from alabaster, its paddles scooping water from a shallow trough, turning a central axle connected to a network of tiny gears. Mainstream fact: Egyptians used water wheels by 300 BCE to lift irrigation water, marking one of the earliest known uses of rotary motion driven purely by water power. Historians still debate whether these wheels were the product of independent innovation or adoption from Hellenistic influences after Alexander's conquest, but either way, they reveal a comfort with harnessing nature's flow. A cool breeze drifts in from the open courtyard, carrying the chatter of onlookers, mesmerized by hydraulic wonders. You lean in as a craftsman invites you to touch a carved wooden basin rim. It vibrates imperceptibly, resonating with the fluid oscillations within. He explains that by channeling water through alternating chambers, they could produce periodic motions, much like a heartbeat. Mainstream records confirm Egyptians experimented with such devices in the Ptolemaic era, circa 2000 BCE, to create rhythmic temple effects, simulating breathing statues. Historians still debate whether these breathing illusions were real mechanical feats or more performative smoke and mirror tricks. Next you enter a domed chamber where aqueducts carve smooth grooves into sandstone walls. Water flows overhead, pouring through concealed jets onto tiered plates, each plate driving a balance weight that lifts an alabaster mask. When all masks rise, they create a chorus of stone faces in rapturous greeting. The effect, a mainstream fact, demonstrates Egyptians' mastery of synchronized hydraulic mechanisms in grand ceremonial settings, a technology later echoed in medieval cathedral fountains. Historians still debate whether such hydraulic displays served purely aesthetic functions or held deeper ritual significance, perhaps replicating the Nile's inundation myth in mechanized form. You step back to admire a larger apparatus, a twin-basin cletspudra linked by a U-shaped tube, equalizing water levels until both basins tilt in unison. Each tilt advances a vertical rack gear, lifting a small statuette of Penia, the craftsman god, a notch higher with each cycle. When the statuette reaches the apex, it sounds a tiny bell to announce midday prayers. This design, you learn, is recorded in the treatise of Hero of Alexandria. Though Hero wrote centuries later, he cites Egyptian prototypes. Fringe historians whisper that Hero may have exaggerated Egyptian contributions to enhance his own thesis on pneumatics. Historians still argue whether Hero's accounts reflect genuine Egyptian practice or his own Hellenistic interpretations projected back in time. Your final stop is a low dais, where a wooden box houses a basilisk-like contraption, a coiled siphon that, when filled, suddenly gushes water, jerking a concealed lever and sending a hollow wooden tube resonating like a trumpet. The priests claimed it was the voice of Osiris, proclaiming his return to the living world. Fringe theories insist this was the world's first pneumatic speaker, yet no remnants of the tube remain. Historians still debate whether Egyptians truly understood airflow resonance or simply stumbled upon acoustic byproducts of hydraulic pressure. You step back into the gentle Nile breeze, droplets still clinging to your robes. Behind you, the still ponds, the gleaming urns, and the whispering water wheels stand testament to a civilization that turned simple currents into wondrous machines. In their hands, water was more than life. It was motion, surprise, and divine spectacle, and in every drip and swoosh, you can hear the soft whisper of an idea that would one day shape the very concept of robotics. You slip beneath a colonnade of sandstone pillars, their carved capitals dripping lotus motifs, and the hush of dawn's first light brushes your cheeks. The scent of frankincense lingers, and you can almost taste the faint sweetness of myrrh on the breeze. Around you, statues stand in silent vigil, gods of old, locked in stone. Yet today, these guardians will breathe, bow, and speak. You're about to witness the temple automata in their full ceremonial glory. Ahead, two colossal wooden statues of Osiris flank the sanctuary entrance. Their polished limbs catch the sun, and you feel a nagging thrill. What if those arms swing open to bless worshippers? Mainstream history confirms that by the New Kingdom, 1300 BCE, Egyptians had installed mechanical statues in temples, activated during major festivals to awe the faithful. Historians still argue whether the movement was purely symbolic or truly mechanical, but the effect on devotees was undeniably profound. You step onto a low dais as priests in linen kilts chant in perfect unison. Their words ripple through the air, and you notice discreet iron rings embedded in the floor, anchor points for hidden ropes. At a whispered cue, acolytes tug concealed lines, and the statue's shoulders shift, their carved fingers unfurling in slow blessing. The motion is almost imperceptible at first, but you feel the ground tremor with collective wonder. A fringe account describes how some automata even spoke, copper tubes hidden in the jaw cavities, channeled wind from bellows, making guttural proclamations as if the god himself had awakened. Quirky as it sounds, a few papyrus fragments hint at a voice-maker device, yet no physical remnants survive. Historians still debate whether such pneumatic speakers truly existed, or if they were later attributions by overzealous scribes. You trace a fingertip along the back of one statue, feeling the seams where separate wooden panels join. Inside, counterweights dangle like secret hearts, and you sense the precision engineering beneath the veneer of stone. In one fainter fringe tale, an ivory-beaked ibis automaton perched on Osiris's shoulder would tilt its head whenever the high priest invoked Thoth. Historians still argue whether this motion was achieved by hidden linkages or simple sleight of hand. Soft laughter drifts from your memory, a joke about a priest whose automaton refused to bow until bribed with a fig, and another about a statue that malfunctioned mid-ritual, offering minty fresh breath instead of divine edicts. You grin, recalling a third jibe. If your god goes silent, check the windbags first. These temple technicians had a wicked sense of humor, balancing reverence with mischievous practicality. The chanting crescendos and torches flare to life along the hypostyle hall. You watch as a statue of Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, tilts forward, her bronze lips parting to reveal a hidden bowl. Wine poured into an upper reservoir drips down, filling the basin until its weight trips a lever and crimson liquid flows from her mouth, symbolizing the blood of enemies crushed in battle. A mainstream fact asserts that Egyptians used such wine-spouting statues on New Year's Day to represent renewal. Historians still debate whether the mechanism was hydraulic or gravity-fed theatrical trickery. You breathe in the smoky air and step closer. Musicians hidden behind papyrus screens play kenores in sync with the statue's movements. Bells embedded in joints tinkle like distant stars. Fringe researchers speculate that these performances were rehearsed with metronomic precision, perhaps even using water-driven metronomes like those that timed temple hymns. Historians still argue whether Egyptians truly mastered such tempo devices or simply relied on practiced musicians. Sensory detail floods your mind. The gentle creak of aged wood, the clink of bronze pins sliding into place, the hushed gasp of onlookers as Isis's wings spread wide. You sense a rhythm, gear snapping into gear, counterweight descending, liver shifting, all orchestrated in perfect harmony. It's a mainstream truth that such automata were integral to festivals like the beautiful Feast of the Valley, where statues processed from Karnak to Luxor amid torchlight and jubilation. In the corner, a small figure of Anubis crouches, its head tilting with uncanny realism whenever a mourner whispered his name. A fringe theory argues that the priests employed optical illusions, mirrors and lenses to animate shadow puppetry within the statue, rather than physical movement. Historians still debate whether these statues moved by hidden rods or by manipulated light and shadow. You notice carvings of gear trains on the temple walls, perhaps a craftsman's brag or a schematic remainder for maintenance. One carving shows a double rope pulley configuration labeled for smooth rise of Horus. Scholars confirm that rope pulleys were used in temple door systems, but here the schematic seems to reference animating a falcon statue, not just opening a gate. Historians still argue whether this carving was instructional or purely decorative. 3 jokes later, you chuckle at the thought. One about the falcon automaton that took flight by ripping its pulley, another about the doors smoking from all the divine horsepower, and a third about a novice saying, "I've seen smarter drones on modern farms," yet beneath the humor lies genuine awe. These temple automata were masterpieces of wood, bronze, leather, and faith. As the final hymn echoes into silence, you watch the statues slowly return to rigid repose, gears locking with soft clicks, torches dim, and the hypostyle hall falls into shadow once more. You linger, fingertips brushing carved wings, heart thrumming with the memory of motion. These automata weren't mere curiosities. They were living symbols, bridges between mortal and divine, technical prowess and sacred art. You step back into the sunlit courtyard, the memory of shifting statues fading like a dream. In their silent stillness, you realize how seamlessly religion and mechanics intertwined in ancient Egypt. The dances of gods were written into wooden gear, and every movement carried meaning far beyond spectacle. As you walk away, you carry with you the echo of bronze knees bending in worship, and the knowledge that these temple automata were among the earliest harbingers of true robotic wonder. You wander into a bustling riverbank plaza, where lanterns sway in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows on hungry crowds. The scent of grilled fish mingles with the smoky sweetness of date wine, and you feel the pulse of excitement. Tonight's festival puppet show is about to begin. You slip through gathered spectators, settling on cool sandstone steps, ears attuned to the low hum of anticipation. A quartet of performers emerges from behind a painted wooden screen, their painted masks glowing in torchlight. They tug on hidden ropes, and suddenly, puppet figures, life-size representations of gods and heroes, leap into motion. Mainstream history records that by the New Kingdom, circa 1300 BCE, itinerant troops roamed Egypt, staging elaborate puppet spectacles during festivals like Wepet Renpet, Egyptian New Year, and the Feast of Apet. Historians still argue whether these performances originated in temple precincts or among nomadic entertainers, but their popularity was undeniable. You lean forward as a puppet of Bes, the dwarf god of music and dance, shimmies across the stage, his wooden limbs clicking on copper hinges. Fringe lore hints that these joints were greased with a paste made from powdered onion skins and animal fat, an odd recipe said to produce a pleasant aroma instead of rancid stink. Quirky? Absolutely. Historians still debate whether onion-based lubricants ever existed, or if the tale was a later embellishment by playwrights with a taste for the exotic. The crowd gasps when a puppet of Set, the storm god, rumbles to life, his mask lit from within by a dim oil lamp, giving his eyes an otherworldly glow. You shiver at the effect. The whispered rumor is that hidden smoke tubes created a rolling fog around his feet. A mainstream fact confirms that Egyptian performers used controlled smoke and mirrors, polished bronze plates reflecting torchlight, to amplify drama in open-air theaters. Historians still argue whether these optical tricks were common in puppet shows or reserved for royal audiences. Fragrance from Nubian incense drifts across your senses, and you spot a scallop shell beside your seat, used to scoop water for cooling spectators in the humid Nile air. You run your finger along its ridges, remembering the lotus seed-textured friction wheels of Section 4. How clever those grooves were. 3 jokes ripple in your mind. One about a puppet cobra that hissed more lines than the actor, another about the Bez puppeteer, who demanded a larger sandal allowance, and a third about a stray monkey puppet that stole the show and the performer's date wine. The performers surely laughed at similar jests backstage. On stage, a miniature bark floats on a shallow pool filled with water. Inside, tiny marionettes of Ra, Isis, and Horus enact the solar cycle dawn, noon, and twilight, each scene marked by subtle movements of the boat, propelled by concealed water jets. A fringe suggestion claims this mechanism inspired the water wheels you saw in Section 5, but historians still debate whether these aquatic puppet stages preceded or followed agricultural water wheels. You can hear the click-click of gear cams beneath the water's surface as the bark glides forward. A mainstream record from a tomb inscription mentions the river that never stills, referencing these boat puppets that drifted endlessly during temple celebrations. Historians still argue whether the poem describes literal hydraulic automata or serves as poetic metaphor for the Nile's ceaseless flow. A silk ribbon brushes your hand as a dancer puppeteer weaves through the crowd, offering sips of spiced wine in alabaster cups. You taste the warmth of cinnamon, cardamom, and honey, and you almost feel as if the puppet drama has come alive around you. Fringe rumors speak of a breathing spectre puppet, an elderly king figure, who inhaled and exhaled, thanks to hidden bellows in his chest cavity. Quirky, yes, but no physical evidence survives. Historians still debate whether such pneumatic figures were ever more than theatrical legend. The spectacle crescendos when a gigantic puppet sphinx, its body spanning 10 cubits, emerges from behind the screen. You feel the ground tremble as laborers beneath the stage shift heavy wooden beams, pivoting the Sphinx's head toward the audience. Mainstream architecture. Facts confirm Egyptians used massive pivot stones in obelisks and temple doors, suggesting similar principles scaled to entertainment. Historians still debate whether puppet sphinxes were common pageantry or luxurious rarities funded by the crown. As twilight deepens, you notice the interplay of sound and motion. Copper bells clinking with every puppet step, reed whistles mimicking bird calls, and hidden percussion marking dramatic turns. The performers exchange wry smiles as one puppet cat swats at a stuffed mouse, prompting the crowd to laugh. And you recall the Ibis automaton from Section 2, how beautifully motion and sound could merge to enchant. In the final scene, the puppet of Osiris stands at the prow of the bark, raising his staff. A concealed pulley tilts the entire stage forward, creating the illusion of descent into the underworld. A hush falls, broken only by the gentle drip of water from earlier demonstrations. When Osiris vanishes behind the screen, pulled by hidden lines, the crowd erupts in applause, their cheers echoing against temple walls. You rise, cheeks warmed by torchlight and wonder, heart pulsing with the memory of artful mechanics. The puppet show fades into the night, but the dance of wood, water, smoke, and gears lingers. A vivid testament to Egyptian ingenuity. And as you drift away from the plaza, you carry with you the echo of moving gods and heroes. Performers, after all, are the first engineers of illusion and motion. You step into a cool, columned antechamber before dawn's first glow, the scent of damp limestone and lotus oil heavy in the air. Ahead, priests in crisp white kilts huddle around low stone basins, each basin's water surface a perfect mirror, reflecting torchlight. You feel the hush of anticipation. This is the domain of the Clockwork Priests, guardians of time itself in temple life. As you draw closer, you notice graduated markings carved into the basin walls, tiny notches denoting hours through the night. Mainstream history tells us these Klepsias water clocks were used by Egyptian timekeepers as early as the Middle Kingdom, circa 2000 BCE, to signal ritual changes under moonlight. Historians still argue whether the intervals were consistent enough to coordinate precise ceremonies, or if priests merely used them as rough guides, but their presence underscores Egyptians' intimate command of hydraulic timing. One priest lifts a small bronze float from the basin, its cork body stained dark with age, while another adjusts a hidden counterweight. Soft drips echo like distant raindrops in a silent forest, and you imagine those droplets directing the rhythm of temple rites. A fringe account whispers that some priests embedded tiny wooden gears at the basin base, linking the float's movement to a set of slender rods that tapped sounding bowls at each hour mark. Quirky? Absolutely. Historians still debate whether these mechanical time indicators ever existed, or if later Hellenistic writers retrofitted Greek sophistication onto Egyptian simplicity. You smell the faint tang of copper from the float's metal ring and taste a whisper of frankincense on the breeze. Shadows flicker across hieroglyphs, describing the Eye of Horus in the heavens, an ancient sundial carved into a granite slab just outside the chamber. By day, priests used that sundial to calibrate the Klepstra basins, ensuring water flow aligned with solar time. Mainstream fact: archaeological fragments confirm Egyptians employed both sundials and shadow clocks by the New Kingdom, 100 BCE, blending celestial observation with hydraulic precision. Historians still argue whether sundial designs were homegrown or influenced by Mesopotamian prototypes, but here they formed a critical feedback loop for the Clockwork Priests. You run your finger along a carved groove in the granite sundial, a callback to the lotus seed friction wheels you admired in Section 4. Imagining water dripping in perfect sync with shifting shadows, a grin tugs at your lips when you recall the joke about a priest who complained his sundial ran slow on cloudy days, and another who claimed his klepsydra overflowed whenever he thought about lunch. A third jibe surfaces: time flies when you're worshipping Ra, but my float sinks like a stone. The priests surely traded similar barbs beneath their linen robes. A soft chant rises from deeper in the temple, an auditory reminder that each hour demands its hymn. You follow the sound to a small alcove, where a miniature water wheel turns. With whispered insistence, its axle, linked to a rack and pinion, slowly advances a wooden pointer along a stone dial marked with hieroglyphs. for each canonical hour. Mainstream scholarship notes that by the Ptolemaic era, circa 2000 BCE, Egyptians had refined these water-powered sundials to automate diurnal rituals. Historians still debate whether such devices were ways worked in provincial shrines or reserved for major cult centers like Karnak. The pointer clicks into place, and a hidden lever releases a bronze bell, its tone resonating like a far-off echo of temple drums. You feel the vibration through your sandals, marveling at how water's gentle pressure orchestrates sound, movement and devotion in perfect harmony. A fringed tail, murmurs of a night owl automaton, an owl statue whose bronze eyes glowed when the 6th night hour began, courtesy of candlelight, reflecting off polished copper. Quirky. Certainly, historians still argue whether this nocturnal sentinel was a real timekeeper or a poetic image of wisdom's watchfulness.
You slide your palm over smooth stone walls, etched with diagrams of weight and lever sequences, the same symbols that guided Papyrus Schematics in Section 3. These carvings served as mnemonic devices for apprentices learning the art of timekeeping. Each symbol evoked a measured pulse of water or a calibrated shift of a counterweight. Mainstream records suggest that Egyptian priests underwent years of training in temple schools, mastering both astronomical observation and mechanical nuance. Historians still debate whether this education was formalized in written curricula or passed down orally through ritual practice. Torches flicker as another priest carries a shallow bronze bowl filled with date wine into the chamber. He pours it slowly into a separate kletstra basin calibrated for shorter daytime hours, a seasonal water clock that compensated for longer summer days and shorter winter ones. You inhale the warm, sweet aroma of fermented dates and imagine scribes recording the basin's fill time on papyrus ledgers. Mainstream evidence confirms Egyptians divided daylight into 12 variable hours, adjusting timekeeping vessels to reflect equinoxes and solstices. Historians still argue whether these variable hour systems coexisted with fixed-hour shadow clocks or replaced them entirely in certain regions. A light breeze stirs the hanging reed curtains at the chamber entrance, carrying the low hum of temple life beyond. You're reminded of the festival automata in Section 7, where timekeeping and spectacle intertwined. Precise hours dictated puppet cues and water-powered bark movements. Here, in this solemn space, time itself is the ritual's heart. Without an accurate signal, hymns start too soon, or offerings are delayed, risking divine displeasure. Soft footsteps behind you announce another shift of the hour. You turn to see a small alabaster statuette perched atop a carved stone shelf. When the hour pointer strikes the designated notch, a hidden linkage tilts the shelf and the statuette glides forward on tiny bronze wheels, bowing in silent observance. A fringe hypothesis suggests these bowing icons acted as desktop reminders for priests' personal devotions, a whimsical mix of utility and faith. Historians still debate whether such private automata ever existed or if they're later inventions of Victorian-era romantics. You swivel to watch the high priest step forward, raising a copper-tipped staff in salute as the alabaster figure concludes its movement and returns to rest. The bell tolls once more, signaling the conclusion of another sacred hour. You taste the cool metal of your amulet pressing against your chest, a reminder that time itself was a living presence in Egyptian temples, measured, marked, and breathed into mechanized being. A final joke drifts into your awareness. If you mess up the 6th hour, just pretend it's a special festival called Oops O'Clock, followed by another about a priest who tried to recalibrate his klepstra with lemon juice for faster flow, and a third quip. Modern clocks have ticks and tocks, we had drips and dribbles. The sheer inventiveness of these timekeepers hums in your mind, as precise and unpredictable as the Nile itself. As you step back into the courtyard's dawnlight, the bells fade, but the echo of measured water and moving dials remains. You've witnessed how Clockwork Priests merged astronomy, hydraulics, and ritual into a living timeline, each movement a bridge between human devotion and mechanical grace. And as the sun lifts higher, you realize that in ancient Egypt, keeping time was more than a means to an end. It was an art form, a science, and a sacred dialogue between mortals and the divine. You step onto the soft, silt-strewn bank of the inundated Nile, where the floodwaters lap against raised stone causeways and spill into hidden flood chambers beneath temple platforms. The air is thick with humid warmth,
the scent of fertile mud and sweet sugarcane drifting together, and you feel the river's slow, irresistible pull beneath your sandals. Here, the temple's grandest automata await activation, powered not by human hands but by the very pulse of Egypt's lifeblood, its seasonal flood. At the heart of the courtyard stands a colossal statue of Khnum, ram-headed god of the inundation, perched on a pedestal pierced with concealed sluices. Mainstream archaeological evidence confirms that Egyptians carved flood channels into temple plinths as early as the Middle Kingdom, 2000 BCE, using rising water pressure to trigger hidden mechanisms. Historians still argue whether these systems were designed primarily for spectacle or as symbolic reenactments of divine creation, but their technical sophistication is undeniable. You crouch beside one narrow inlet, watching the murky brown water creep upward inside a bronze-lined cylinder. As the level reaches a critical mark, it presses against a leather diaphragm, which balloons outward and pushes a lever connected to an iron cam. You can almost hear the soft hiss of water displacing air, the slow click of the cam rotating, and then, like a slow exhale, the statue's massive arm begins to descend in solemn benediction. A fringe tradition whispers of a flood-driven lion, automaton, at the temple of Komombo. When Nile waters rose, hidden tubes channeled the current into a sealed basin behind the lion, causing its jaw to snap open with a thunderous clap. Quirky? Absolutely. Historians still debate whether this roaring spectacle was ever built, or whether later Greek visitors embellished the tale to suit their own myths of hydraulic wonders. You rise to your feet and follow a raised stone ramp toward a series of stone wheels carved directly into the floor. These wheels, you learn, acted as primitive turbines. Inundation water poured through carved spokes, generating torque that powered gears buried beneath the central platform. Mainstream fact: engineers in the Ptolemaic period, circa 300 BCE, used water-driven turbines in grain mills, and though no direct Egyptian examples survive, temple hydraulics likely pioneered the concept centuries earlier. Historians still argue whether these subterranean turbines were true innovations or adaptations of earlier water wheel designs. Through the swirling humidity, you catch a soft rumble as dozens of water jars slowly tilt on hidden pivots, pouring red wine offered as libations into the mouths of life-size statues of Sekhmet. The effect is mesmerizing. Copper spouts in the lioness's throat channel the liquid, making it appear as though she drinks directly from the Nile and the temple's generosity. Fringe accounts suggest that some priests mixed in rare blue lotus extract to produce a glowing bioluminescent effect at night, though no chemical residue has ever been found. Historians still debate whether such glowing offerings ever occurred, or if the idea sprang from Hellenistic fantasies. You navigate past granite reliefs, depicting the flood god Hapi, lifting the Nile between his arms, and recall the counterweight pendants from Section 2 that animated Not's arch. Here, hydraulic force replaces those weights, and you can see the same principle at work. Rising water does the lifting. One carved schematic on a temple wall shows a liver system labeled "Bring Cain to Life." Likely Cain, a local crocodile guardian figure. You imagine the carving serving as a maintenance guide for priests servicing the hydraulics. A sudden splash catches your attention as an alabaster basin tips forward, emptying its water into a trough and causing a hidden spindle to spin. That spindle, in turn, winds a tightly coiled linen spring until it clicks into place. You grin. This elegant fusion of hydraulic charging and spring release echoes the hybrid chariot from Section 5. It's a mainstream truth that ancient technicians understood the power of cinched springs. They used them in weapons and door mechanisms by the New Kingdom, 1400 BCE, and here they amplify the flood's might for dramatic effect. Historians still debate how widespread this clever combination really was. You step onto a narrow bridge spanning a flood channel, its surface trembling slightly underfoot as water surges beneath. Below, you glimpse a row of carefully angled sluice gates directing the current toward hidden buckets. As each bucket fills, it descends, pulling a rope that runs through a series of pulleys to raise a panel on the statue's pedestal. You can nearly taste the brackish slip of Nile water on your lips. Fringe lore claims that some panels revealed secret inscriptions only visible when lifted, messages from the gods themselves. Historians still argue whether these inscriptions were real or whether they were simply poetic devices in temple hymns. Above you, a carved lotus capital drips condensation from air cooled by underground water channels, an early basalt air conditioner. You wink at the callback to the humid courtyards in Section 5, where you first encountered water-driven rhythms. 3 jokes flit through your mind, one about a scribe who wet his papyrus reading the flood schematics, another about a priest who got carried away by the current, and a third about a novice engineer complaining of downstream burn. Their playful banter underscores the fact that even the grandest hydraulics elicited a grin among their makers. You pause at a shallow alcove, where a small bronze valve sits exposed. A priest explains that by adjusting its apertures, they could fine-tune flood pressure, calibrating how forcefully a statue might bow, or how quickly a panel might rise. It's a mainstream insight. Egyptians understood throttling centuries before medieval engineers documented it in Europe. Historians still argue whether adjustable valves were common in Egyptian hydraulics or reserved for royal sanctuaries. Your final view is of the great Hippo-style hall, transformed by floodlights of reflected water. Hidden mirrors catch the river's glow, sending dancing reflections across moving statues, an effect of water plus optics that rivals any modern light show. Fringe enthusiasts claim this luminous dance inspired later water organ inventions in Roman villas. Though direct connections remain speculative, historians still debate the lineage of those later devices and Egypt's true influence on Mediterranean hydraulics. As you step back into the courtyard's dappled sunlight, the roar of the flood subsides and the desert wind carries away the last droplets. You stand amid silent statues, their flood-driven magic paused until the next inundation. In those moments, you understand that Egypt's greatest machine was the Nile itself, and that harnessing its seasonal pulse was perhaps the most awe-inspiring automaton of all. You slip through a narrow doorway at the back of the workshop district, where the air grows cooler and the scent of sandalwood lacquer mingles with the faintest dust motes dancing in torchlight. The walls here are scrawled with faded glyphs and sketches of gears, pulleys, and strange contraptions, remnants of guild secrets thought lost to the shifting sands. As you pick your way among overturned workbenches and shattered clay models, you realize you've stumbled into the hidden realm of Egypt's engineering guilds. A mainstream historical fact greets you by the New Kingdom, 1400 BCE. State-sponsored guilds, often attached to major temples, trained artisans in metalwork, carpentry, and stone carving. These guilds operated under oath of secrecy, their knowledge passed orally from master to apprentice. Guild members signed their work only with cryptic symbols rather than names, ensuring that design stayed within the brotherhood. Historians still argue whether these guilds had formal schools with curricula or simply tightly guarded oral traditions, but their influence on mechanized innovation is indisputable. You crouch beside a broken clay mold, stamped with a spiral emblem, a likely guild insignia. The spiral motif recurs on bronze gears, on papyrus schematics. Even on a hidden pulley wheel, you spot half buried in sand. Fringe lore suggests that this spiral symbol marked a master-level design, code for a device so advanced it could only be shown to those who had endured the full 11-year apprenticeship. Quirky? Absolutely. Historians still debate whether the symbol denoted rank or referred to a secret society within the guild. Your fingers brush against a stack of brittle leather-bound notebooks, their covers stamped with the same spiral. You open one and find sketches of a spring-driven scribe automaton, a small statue that dipped a reed into ink and wrote blessings on temple scrolls. Annotations in faded ink hint at material ratios, 2 parts cedar resin to 1 part beeswax for optimal spring tension. Mainstream scholarship confirms that Egyptians experimented with composite materials, like flax fiber bound in resin for strength and flexibility in decorative items. Yet no surviving automaton has been found, and many notebooks were likely burned to protect guild mysteries. A light breeze stirs across the doorway, carrying the echo of hammer against bronze from the courtyard you left behind. You remember the half-finished automaton monkey from Section 4 and the water-powered chariot of Section 5. The guilds likely oversaw these projects, coordinating engineers, smiths, and carpenters. Here, in this cavernous back room, you sense the organizational hum of coordinated expertise rather than solitary tinkerers. On a low table stands a weathered wooden box with hidden compartments. You slide open a drawer and find a Saul bronze key engraved with the spiral. A joke flits through your mind. Apparently, the key to success was literally kept under wraps, and you can almost hear a guild apprentice snickering at his own pun. Behind the laughter, though, lies the reality that access to advanced knowledge was strictly controlled, reserved for those who'd paid their dues with sweat and secrecy. You rise and follow a narrow corridor lined with niches. In each niche sits a different prototype: a bronze falcon with rotating wings, a wooden scarab that rolled forward when heated by sunlight, and a copper tube with reeds cut to precise lengths, perhaps an automaton flute. Fringe accounts claim that one niche once housed a self-writing papyrus, a device that applied pressure via hidden cams to draw glyphs automatically. Historians still debate whether any pneumatic or cam-operated writing machines existed or if they were imaginative fables recorded by later Greek authors. The corridor ends at a heavy stone door engraved with pictograms of scepters, flails, and gears. You push it open to reveal a vaulted chamber, where remnants of a long-forgotten assembly hall lie scattered. Here, master craftsmen once convened under candlelit rafters, comparing notes and refining designs. A mainstream inscription on a fragmentary stele confirms that guild meetings occurred during the reign of Ramesses II, 279–1213 BCE, praising the voices in unison that guided temple mechanics. Yet the nature of those gatherings, formal lectures or informal workshops, remains unclear. Historians still argue whether guild knowledge was ever formally recorded or strictly oral. You spot a pile of papyrus scrolls tied with faded ribbons. Carefully, you untie one and unroll it to discover a table of gear ratios, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4 notations, indicating precise speed reductions for automata that needed synchronized movements. Mainstream evidence of gear teeth in tombs and temples supports the idea that Egyptians understood proportional rotation, but no complete gear train has survived to confirm these ratios were applied in practice. Historians still debate whether these tables were theoretical exercises or practical workshop references. 3 jokes rise in your head. One about apprentices calling these tables Egypt's first spreadsheet, another about a master declaring, "May your teeth always mesh," and a third about someone scribbling, "If your ratio's off, you're off the guild." Despite the centuries, you sense that humor, like craftsmanship, was integral to guild life, easing the tension of meticulous work. A sudden clatter echoes down a distant corridor, and you realize time is slipping by. The sun outside has dipped low, and torchlight casts long shadows across the dusty floor. You gather up a handful of dusty scrolls and key fragments, knowing you'll never unravel all the secrets of this hidden order. Yet even these fragments testify to a sophisticated network of artisans whose collective knowledge fueled Egypt's automata. As you retrace your steps toward the exit, you pause at a carved relief showing a row of artisans passing a gear from hand to hand, like runners in a relay. It's a powerful image, each craftsman contributing to a greater whole, building upon the discoveries of predecessors. Fringe scholars suggest that some guilds extended beyond Egypt's borders, trading techniques with Mesopotamia and the Levant, but concrete evidence remains elusive. Historians still debate whether Egyptian guilds were insular or part of a wider Bronze Age knowledge exchange. Emerging into the cool night air, you lift your gaze to the starry sky. The spiral emblem from the guild walls now feels like a motif woven into the cosmos itself, a reminder that the drive to create, to mechanize, and to control motion transcended individual artisans. The guilds may have vanished into sand, their workshops sealed and buried, but their legacy persists in every moving statue, every water-driven marvel, and every whispered debate among historians. You take a deep breath, tasting the crisp desert breeze, and carry with you the echoes of collaboration, secrecy, and ingenuity. The lost engineering guilds may remain ghosts beneath the desert floor, but in their hidden chambers, they forged the blueprint for robotic wonder that still resonates today. You step once more into the threshold between past and present, sand crunching beneath your sandals as the sun dips low, casting long shadows across the ruins of a once bustling workshop. The fading light illuminates broken gear fragments, half buried in dust and charred wooden beams, still etched with spiral guild markings. You feel the weight of centuries on your shoulders, the echo of clinking bronze and whispering priests lingering in the cooling air. This is the moment to reflect on how those ancient automata shaped futures far beyond Egypt's borders. You wander among toppled statues and collapsed alcoves, recalling how each mechanism from the water-fed klechers to flood-charged idols was a testament to human curiosity. A mainstream historical fact anchors you. Many of these mechanical concepts traveled via trade caravans and scholar exchanges into the Hellenistic world by the 3rd century BCE, influencing Greek inventors like Ctesibius and Hero of Alexandria. Historians still argue whether Egyptians invented these devices entirely on their own, or whether they adapted ideas exchanged along the Levantine coast, but the cross-cultural spark is undeniable. Your gaze falls on a broken stone relief depicting Thoth's ibis automaton, its wings spread as though in flight. Fringe tidbits suggest that fragments of this very relief inspired Renaissance engineers rediscovering ancient blueprints. Leonardo da Vinci himself supposedly studied sketches of Egyptian cams hidden in monastic libraries. Quirky? Absolutely. Historians still debate whether da Vinci accessed genuine Egyptian sources or whether later Romantic writers embellished the tale to weave a mythic lineage between pharaohs and polymaths.
You trace the worn groove where water once coursed, remembering how hydraulic power later evolved into the water wheels of medieval mills. Mainstream scholarship confirms that medieval Islamic engineers cited Egyptian books in treatises on water management, preserving automata designs through Arabic translations. Historians still argue whether these translations were faithful technical manuals or allegorical commentaries cloaked in poetic language, but they undeniably carried Egyptian ingenuity forward.
A breeze stirs a half-intact papyrus scroll on a collapsed bench. You unroll it, revealing gear ratio tables and cryptic hieroglyphs. These same ratios reappear centuries later in European clockmaking guild records, hinting at an unbroken thread of knowledge. French researchers propose that secret itinerant guild members transported Egyptian schematics westward, hiding them within coded guild emblems. Historians still debate whether such clandestine networks existed or if the similarities are coincidental convergences of mechanical problem-solving. You step past a weathered column, carved with lunar phase symbols paired with water levels, a nod to the interconnectedness of timekeeping and hydraulics, mainstream truth. Those combined principles resurfaced in the 14th century water clock towers of Baghdad and Venice, showcasing the enduring genius of Egyptian design. Historians still argue whether European engineers directly copied Egyptian mechanisms or reinvented parallel concepts inspired by multiple ancient sources. 3 jokes bubble up, one about a time-traveling engineer calling Egypt the original startup hub, another about a modern robot engineer lamenting that his machines don't smell of lotus oil, and a third about a scholar quipping, "If only my smartphone had a water drip notification." The humor, like the machines themselves, bridges millennia, reminding you that invention has always carried a human spark. As dusk deepens, lantern light flickers on fragments of scrolls lying in sandy craters. You imagine future archaeologists piecing together these shards, reconstructing lost automata with 3D printed parts and CAD models. Fringe futurists predict a grand reconstruction of an entire temple automaton ensemble, statues marching on silent tracks, water-driven wheels turning again. Historians still debate whether modern recreations can truly capture the spirit of ancient craftsmanship or if they remain clever pastiches guided by contemporary assumptions. You pause before a line of fractured bronze pins and wooden axles strewn across the ground. These humble remnants maintain the DNA of mechanical engineering, yet they've been overshadowed by pyramids and pharaohs in textbooks. Mainstream education now includes modules on early automation in university engineering programs, acknowledging Egypt's pivotal role. Historians still argue whether credit should rest with temple artisans or with the scribes who first documented their designs, but the recognition is growing. The night air cools as stars emerge overhead, mirroring the polished copper mirrors Egyptians used to reflect torchlight in ritual displays. You feel a deep resonance, the same curiosity that powered those automata, blending art, faith, and mechanics, lives on in every modern robot, every drone, every artificial intelligence that moves at the cutting edge of possibility. Fringe philosophers speculate that the Egyptian automata represent humanity's first existential question: can we create something that mimics life itself? Historians still debate whether these devices were ever meant as philosophical statements or purely as tools of wonder. You breathe deeply, tasting the desert night and smelling faint cedar resin on a broken gear. Across millennia, the whisper of moving statues has become the roar of countless machines shaping our world. As you turn to leave, you realize that these ancient robots did more than entertain temple crowds. They seeded the fundamental notion that humans can animate the inanimate. That idea endures, driving engineers and dreamers alike. Wind down. Now that our journey through sun-baked workshops, temple halls and floodlit courtyards has come to a close, let your mind float gently on the echo of ancient gears clicking beneath the desert stars. Imagine the slow drip of water from a worn basalt klepstra, each drop marking the passage of time that bridges then and now. Feel the soft weight of sand under your feet, the distant hum of a water wheel turning in moonlit silence, and allow the stories of wooden doves, copper-tongued idols, and gild-guarded blueprints to lull you toward rest. In the hush of the Egyptian night, every mechanism becomes a heartbeat, every whispered creak a gentle reminder that ingenuity is timeless. Whether you're drifting along the Nile or tucked into your bed far from these ancient shores, remember that human curiosity and playful inventiveness are threads weaving through every era. The gears of memory turn slowly, guided by wonder and the faint aroma of lotus oil on a midnight breeze. So as you close your eyes, let the soft cadence of moving statues carry you into dreams, where the impossible takes shape, where automata of bronze and wood live again. Stepping lightly through temple courtyards lit by torch and starlight, rest easy, knowing that the spark first kindled by Egyptian craftsmen still flickers in every robot that whirs, every drone that hovers, and every brilliant idea that takes flight. End of script. Sweet dreams.